Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar featuring the 2022 Gerald I. Susman Sustainability Leadership Award, Dr. Diane Phillips. I'm Jen Crispel, the Director of Alumni Relations at the Smeal College of Business. We're very excited to have alumni joining us for this event from many different locations today, and we're welcoming all of our friends of Smeal as well. Thank you for coming. Your engagement makes the Smeal Alumni Network stand out. Please feel free to share where you are joining us from in the chat. Throughout the year, we host a variety of virtual and in-person events, and I encourage you to visit the Smeal Alumni website to view future events and other ways to connect with the college. Opportunities include volunteering to help students and faculty, connecting with other alumni, and supporting important college initiatives. On the website, you can also become familiar with our talented Smeal Alumni Career Services Office, which offers career coaching, lifelong learning webinars, and job search resources. One specific way to become involved that I wanted to make sure our attendees today are aware of is the Smeal Sustainability Alumni Network. This network aims to connect Smeal alumni with a shared passion for sustainability by providing a platform to engage with the current Smeal students, faculty, and with each other. And we are putting a few of the links that I just mentioned into the chat for easy access for you. So before we get started, I wanted to share that once our award winner, Dr. Phillips, begins, please feel free to use the chat to submit questions for consideration. We will do Q&A at the end, and we will get to as many questions as possible. And now I'd like to introduce the Director of the Center for the Business of Sustainability, Eric Foley.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are joining us from. It is great to be together. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. I just want to share briefly that I was in the atrium yesterday, and I had a unique run-in with a student who was sitting at a table, and the table said that they were raising money for Ukraine. And a lot of people were walking by, and I was about to walk by myself, and something told me I should stop. And so I stopped, and I ended up shaking the hands with a young man who is a corporate innovation and entrepreneurship major at Smeal, and himself from Ukraine. And it was an amazing interaction just yesterday in the business building to talk with him, asked him, of course, about his family who have all fled to Portland. I have family in Portland, to Poland. And the stories that he had to share were quite something. It made me think about the power of business to advance peace and justice in the world, and what somebody with his current experience and background is going to do with a Smeal degree in corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. Pretty exciting. So let me tell you a little bit more about this award, and then it's my pleasure to get to introduce Dr. Phillips and then get out of her way. So this award that Jennifer mentioned is named after Dr. Gerald Susman. Many of you might know Jerry, we call him. He is still alive and well. In fact, I just saw him last week at a Smeal Sustainability Advisory Board meeting. Jerry is the retired Robert and Judith Klein Professor of Management at Smeal. And we like to think about him as the founder of sustainability in the college around 2008, 2009. He and his lovely wife, Liv, have continued to be actively engaged with Penn State more broadly, and they've been active supporters of our work to advance business and markets as key players in safeguarding human rights, equity, and protecting the environment. In honor of Jerry, and thanks to the Susman's generosity, we're able to create this award in his honor to recognize exceptional leadership in sustainability, people that are advancing business practice, education, and scholarship in this field. So this year's award winner is Dr. Diane Phillips, and I'm really excited and pleased that we get to hear from her today. So let me introduce her to you and then ask her to come to the stage here. So Dr. Phillips is a professor of marketing at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. She's also a guest professor at the Institute for Retail Management at the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland, which I just saw on a list yesterday as one of the 10 happiest countries in the world. Interesting. She received her Ph.D. from Penn State University, and she focuses her research in the areas of consumer psychology, sustainability, and marketing strategy. I can think of no more important combination of topics than those. Her research has been published in a variety of international publications, such as the Journal of Consumer Psychology, Psychology and Marketing, the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services, and the Sustainability Journal, the Journal of Sustainability. Dr. Phillips' first textbook, Consumer Behavior and Insights, was published by Oxford University Press in 2021. And I just want to say that if you're a student out there at St. Joseph's or at Penn State or another fine institution, and you might be working on a final paper for the semester, just keep in mind that Dr. Phillips wrote a 576-page paper in the form of a textbook, and she's working on another one right now. So you're in good company. That's just what she has done. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Diane Phillips and congratulating her as our 2022 Susman Sustainability Leadership Award winner. Dr. Phillips, the virtual stage is yours. Congratulations and thanks for being here.
Thank you, everybody. So no complaining for your final projects for a 10-page final project or something like that. Let's get started right away, okay? I wanted to sort of set the tone just a little bit with a couple of quotes here. So to get us thinking in the direction of sustainability and possibilities. This is from Al Gore, former U.S. Vice President. He says, as human beings, we are vulnerable to confusing the unprecedented with the improbable. In our everyday experience, if something has never happened before, we are generally safe in assuming that it is not going to happen in the future. But the exceptions can kill you, and climate change is one of those exceptions. Here's another nice one by Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General. He says, saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth. These are one and the same fight. We must connect the dots between climate change, water scarcity, energy shortages, global health, food security, and women's empowerment. Solutions to one problem must be solutions to all. So I wanted to start out by talking about these two quotes just very briefly, or just showing you these two quotes very briefly to remind you again that this is something that we have not seen before. And so the normal way of thinking through a problem and generating a list of solutions, those aren't going to work. So I wanted to give you also a little bit of an introduction to show you about my journey and my path towards sustainability and what I've done over the years with sustainability. You know, I graduated from Penn State University back in the day, many more years than I'd like to admit. And my very first job straight out of school was with a big multinational corporation in Houston, Texas. So here I was, I took my shiny marketing degree, I moved to Texas, and I worked for this great company. And the name of the company was, wait for it, Exxon Corporation. So definitely not the company that comes to mind first off when you're thinking about sustainability. So what happened is I started my job there, and for about 2 weeks, all of the things that I had learned in the classroom at Penn State, I was seeing firsthand in what I was doing on a day-to-day basis at Exxon. I was in what was called the marketing law department, and you know, we were getting marketing research reports back. We were meeting with ad agencies. We were looking at storyboards. We were strategizing about what we were going to do. And then boom, all of a sudden the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened. And all of these plans, all of these things that we had done went completely out the window, and we went into crisis mode. And as the junior person on the team, you know, I had just started a couple of weeks before. I certainly wasn't in any decision-making capacity, but I was in the room when these things were being discussed. And it was really interesting, a fascinating time to be there to see the kinds of things that were being discussed and the kinds of things that were being planned. And I noticed very quickly what we were saying to the outside world, you know, with interviews on CNN or something like that, was completely different than what was being talked about internally. And I started to realize pretty quickly that, you know, businesses can really be a force for good, but they can be a force for bad at the same time. And that was a real turning point in my mind. And that sort of put me down a different path to think about what I could do to influence companies and organizations to do a lot more in terms of being sustainable in their operations and moving us towards more sustainable solutions. So what I'd like to talk to you about in the next couple of minutes that we have is, the extent of the problem, what's the problem, and maybe how can we address it? So let's talk about these things. What's the problem? We're going to talk about the new climate reality. We're going to talk about the fact that businesses need competencies in sustainability, and the fact that U.S. students, sadly, right now, are behind their global counterparts. This is a complex, multifaceted problem, and it's going to need a complex, integrated, creative solution. So the new climate reality, let's start with this. This is definitely not your grandpa's climate. We are absolutely in uncharted territory. A couple of quick things. We are now putting 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of our atmosphere every 24 hours. And mainly that's coming from CO2. And CO2 happens or is emitted when we burn fossil fuels. So oil, gas, and coal. When we burn those things, CO2 is emitted and it goes up into the thin shell of our atmosphere and it stays there. It stays there for a long time, perhaps hundreds of years. And because of that, it's thickening the layer. It's like a blanket on top of the planet, and it's making it harder for our planet to cool itself naturally. It's keeping it warm, just like you have a blanket over your bed in the wintertime. It keeps it warm, and that heat stays inside. What else? 2021 was the 45th consecutive year with the global temperature average above the 20th century average. So, there are definitely a lot of detractors out there, folks who say, well, yeah, this is a cyclical thing. We admit, sure, that we've had a couple of extraordinarily warm years over the, past few years. But, as the planet goes along, we have some cool periods and we have some warm periods. We're just in one of those cyclical times right now where we're in a kind of a warm period. 45 years in a row is not a cyclical short-term period. It's not a little blip. It's not something that's going to turn around. It's a trend. And 45 years in a row where we are above where we ought to be is definitely something for concern. What else do we know? We know that CO2 concentrations are the highest that they've ever been in 800,000 years. How do we know this? Obviously, people were walking around 800,000 years ago with instruments reading the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere in those days. Instead, what we know is we know this because of ice core samples. So think about it, like just when you maybe see a tree that's cut down, you can look at the rings of the tree and you can count the rings and you can see how old that tree is. Same sort of thing when we're talking about ice core samples. What you can do is scientists go up to the Arctic or down to the Antarctic and they drill down a huge tube of ice, lift it up, lay it down along like this huge table. And what they do is just like the rings in a tree, they can count back the layers and they can count all the way back 800,000 years, even longer than that. And what they notice is like, it's very clear to see these divisions every single year, these different layers. And what they do is they take a tiny little slice of that ice, and inside that ice is embedded air bubbles. Just like, think about it, the ice cubes that you have in your freezer at home. They melt those down, the air is released out of those ice bubbles. And that's how they can tell how much CO2 is in the atmosphere all the way back, even at 800,000 years. So we are at the highest point we've been in 800,000 years. That's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere and a lot of warming that's happening. Speaking of warming, 20 of the 21 hottest years ever recorded on this planet have occurred since 2000. Increases, of course, in severity and frequency of storms, droughts, and heat waves. We're seeing this every day. Just simply turn on the news. And of course, we're having severe disruptions to people's lives and livelihoods. One measure that's used quite a bit when we're talking about climate issues is the amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere. And when I first started talking and going around and giving discussions about this, we were at about 385 parts per million. ppm is parts per million. And then we started inching up closer to 390 and then 400. When we hit 400, people were about to pull their hair out. And now we're at 419. This was yesterday. I checked out the numbers from the Mauna Loa laboratory in Hawaii. And that is of grave concern because The planet has only exceeded 400 parts per million twice in its history. And what happened? First time was about 15 to 20 million years ago. And at that point, when we were above 400, sea levels were about 75 to 120 feet higher than they are today. And then the most recent time was about 3 to 5 million years ago, and sea levels were about 45 to 75 feet higher than they are today. So if this doesn't stop you in your tracks, then I don't know what does. The planetary climate budget is about 300 gigatons of CO2. And what does that mean? That means basically we have about 300 gigatons of CO2 that we can put up into the atmosphere before we're going to reach a point where we're going to have enough warming that we're going to hit 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. 2 degrees Celsius doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot, but it really is. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. We are adding 40 gigatons a year. So that's 7 years. And 2 degrees increase in temperature can be quite catastrophic. If we can just keep it at 2 degrees increase in temperature, and to tell you the truth, we're about to blow past that unless we make really radical changes very, very quickly. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that we can get to 2 degrees increase in temperature, keep it at 2 degrees increase in temperature. We know for sure that the sea level will rise to the extent, and it will be hot, so hot in some areas of the world, and that between 800 and 2 billion people will be displaced. Now, think about that. When you're thinking about this in terms of, focusing our attention on climate change, we also need to realize that this is an issue of justice as well. And the fact that most of these people, these 800 to 2 billion people, right now we have about 7.8 billion people on the planet. Quite likely, most of these people are living in areas where they're desperately poor. They're probably more than likely people of color, women, children, people like that. So when we're talking about the issue of climate change, realize that it has all of these other connections as well in terms of justice and social equity and those kinds of things as well. So we know that the science is clear, right? We know that it's happening. We know that we're doing it. We know that it's bad. So here's the thing, it just boggles the mind to me that this is probably the most important existential threat of our time, and people aren't talking about it. I mean, what were we talking about last week? We were talking about that stupid thing at the Oscars where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. Our minds and our attention is focused on that rather than this. It boggles the mind to me. So what are we going to do about it? How can we do something to help young people be prepared for this? And for 25 years now, I've been at St. Joseph's University, and I have a couple of observations in terms of, talking to students. I teach undergraduate level classes. I do MBA. I do exec level classes. And I also go around and I do a lot of talks to different organizations and research and writing and all of that stuff. So because of that, I wanted to give you some observations that I've had that I think might be useful in you and your own role, whether you're a student who's about to graduate, or if you're somebody who is at an organization who is hiring young people, or maybe even if you're at an organization where you are more in a capacity where you're making decisions for that organization. We know for sure that stakeholders are increasingly demanding action from businesses, and businesses are responding. So because businesses are responding and they're doing different kinds of things, there is already this generation of action and initiatives and interest in these kinds of things that are happening. We know also that organizations are embracing sustainability standards and protocols. So rather than, waving that green flag and saying, hey, everybody, trust us, we're doing all of this great thing, all of these great things in sustainability, they're having outside independent organizations come in, and they're having their operations certified by outside independent organizations. It gives them an extra level of credibility. We know big companies are making major announcements and commitments to this. Ford, for example, just a couple of weeks ago announced a $22 billion commitment to EV cars, and that by 2030, they want to ensure that 40% of its fleet is going to be electric. They're building 3 big plants right in the middle of the country here. And 2 of them will be manufacturing cars and 1 will be manufacturing batteries. GM, not to be outdone, is committing $27 billion and has pledged that they will only produce EVs by 2035. So that's exciting news. We know that well over 80% of global businesses issue sustainability reports. So this is something that's happening. Businesses out there are talking about this, and students and young people need to be prepared for it. And I'm afraid in many ways, they're just not where they need to be right now. Another thing that's happening as well is that many global businesses are using the UN Sustainable Development Goals in their reporting. They issue these annual sustainability reports, or they reference what they're doing with respect to these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And if you haven't heard of them, there's 17 big goals that the United Nations has adopted. Something like 196 countries have already signed on to this and agreed to do this. And what they're doing is they said, okay, we get it. It's not just about climate change. It's about all of these other things as well. And each one of these 17 goals has a whole list of benchmarks and indicators to help keep track of progress and help folks set their goals. This is being talked about in corporate boardrooms. This is being talked about in, different task forces and things like that on sustainability. And if this is being talked about in businesses, then we need to make sure that our students are ready for that. So how can we make an argument for why organizations need to be more sustainable in their operations? It used to be when I used to go out there and give these talks, I had to sort of say, now listen, trust me, I'm going and I'm out there and I'm talking to a lot of folks and this is what they're saying. This is what I'm hearing. So it was sort of more of a testimonial, that I'm saying, trust me on this. I know it. I'm hearing it. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. And that's kind of exciting actually, because now we have data on this. Now we have actual numbers and objective figures that we can show to people in decision-making capacities that this really is something to do. And it's going to help your business. Your business is going to be not just more sustainable, but actually better run, more efficient and more effective at what it does. Why? Well, one of the things is that it lowers your cost. If you're a lot more efficient with using your resources, you're going to be lowering your costs. Less money on the amount of money that you have to spend on energy, less money on disposal fees and waste removal and things like that. We know that businesses that are more sustainable in their operations are also really good in terms of staying ahead of environmental regulations. They can see it coming down the pike and they're ready for it. We know as well that businesses are better able to address the needs of consumers. There are a lot of consumers out there who this is really a core value to them. And they know that if they can believe that the organization also has a similar set of values to do something to address this climate crisis, then they can align themselves with that business and feel as if, they're in this together with the organization. Another thing is that organizations are more innovative. I mean, let's face it, if you see the world through a set of sustainability lenses, you're going to see things that maybe you've never noticed before. You're going to see things that are going to be maybe options that you've never considered. And maybe you'll be more innovative in your approaches to addressing the climate crisis. We know that you're going to be lowering your risk in terms of, for example, a lot of things, but check out volatile energy prices. If you were powering your plant or your operations with fossil fuels, and, Eric talked at the beginning of the discussion today about what's happening in Ukraine and the terrible things that Russia is doing to those folks there. It's awful when you see that. Every time you turn on the news, it's another horrible, gut-wrenching story. But because of that, energy prices are all over the place. If you're using renewable energy, you don't have to worry about that. And what businesses don't like is risk. They like to be very clear about what's happening, and they don't like all kinds of volatile things happening. They want to be able to predict. And one way that they can be able to predict the future, at least in one respect, is to move away from fossil fuels and not be subject to that risk of crazy fluctuating energy prices. And then another thing entirely is attracting and retaining better talent. Folks like to know that they're going to be working for a company that sort of fits with who they are and what they want to be, and the fact that they want to make a difference in the lives of other people, and they want to know that their life has meaning as well. I have some really interesting numbers here. Speaking of better talent, we know that 70 to 80% of MBA students want more climate content in their programs. About 80 to 90% think businesses should play a role in tackling climate change. And this is the most exciting thing at all, I think. 50% are actually willing to take a lower salary to ensure that their values align with that of their companies. So, I mean, if you think about that, I mean, these folks, they want to know that they're going to make a difference. They want to know when they get out of bed in the morning, put their feet on the floor and get moving, that it's going to make a difference to somebody, and their life is going to have meaning. And then what they do is going to matter. So with that said, what do we do in terms of those folks, those people who are graduating from university and entering the workforce, and the different kinds of things that they can do to make a difference, to ensure that what they do matters? We know that according to a recent study by Giselle Weybrecht, business schools are not effectively incorporating SDGs into their curricula. We are a little bit behind where we ought to be, and we are a lot behind where the rest of the world is. Here's some, schools in different parts of the world that are doing some fantastic things in sustainability. I mean, I can give you all kinds of examples: Europe, South America, Australia, New Zealand, India. They have some fascinating and exciting new programs that they're instituting, and they are training their students to take roles at their organizations in a way that we are not here in the United States. And one of the things that worries me quite a bit is I look at this as an issue of U.S. business competitiveness, global business competitiveness. If we don't have the same level of training and inspiration and ability to give our students the tools that are going to be necessary to function well and to succeed in organizations, then we're going to be a step behind the rest of the world. And we want to make sure that our students aren't left flat-footed as far as that goes, because this is our student. This is Greta. Everybody knows Greta, right? She's this environmental activist. She says, I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic and act as if the house was on fire. Greta is our student. Greta is 19 years old today. She's same age as a college sophomore. So when you think about it, Greta and the people that she's inspired, like these people who show up to these huge climate protests and everything. This is a bunch of young people trying to petition for immediate action and real action on climate change. These are the students. These are the young people who are in our classrooms today and who are very soon going to be major players in organizations all over the world. So here's the question, are we going to be smarter than that frog in the pot? I mean, you all know the analogy, right? You fill up the pot with a whole bunch of water, stick the frog in it, slowly turn up the heat on the stove, and the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And then the poor little frog doesn't really realize it until it's too late. And then bad news for the frog. Are we going to realize it? Are we going to notice? Are we going to see these things? Or is it going to be too late? I'm hoping, and I'm a glasses half full kind of person. I'm hoping that we notice. And here's some things that I would like to propose to you. So no matter where you are in the world today, no matter where you're signing in from, how can we address? I have some ideas. How can we address these things? So first of all, we know for sure that this is a multifaceted problem that is requiring an integrated and networked solution. The first thing first is we have to stop our silo thinking. We need to have a network approach to all of this. We need to ensure that because the problem is interconnected, we need to recognize it as an interconnected problem. First of all, we need to see that water, electricity, poverty, all of these things are completely interrelated. And because of that, because it's a network kind of problem, we need to come up with a networked kind of solution. Excuse me. And insights are critical. So let's talk about these silos and this networked solution. First of all, let's break down these functional silos. So if you are in a university, break down the silos, between in the business school. I could just say, for example, the marketing department and the management department, the finance department, the accounting department. People need to work together on this and create coursework and solutions that are cross-disciplinary, not just in the business school, but all over the university. If you're in an organization as well, same thing, break down the silos and start talking to one another. People in different parts of the organization absolutely have fantastic ideas and can bring something to the table as far as a solution. I think another important thing as well is modeling sustainable behaviors and practices in business. Shift to renewable energy. It's the easiest thing. It's a 5-minute phone call, a 10-minute phone call. Here in Southeast Pennsylvania, we have a choice. We have Pico. We can order our electricity or have our electricity delivered to the house through Pico, or we can have the alternative of signing up with a renewable energy provider. It's easy to do. It's delivered over the same electric lines. We're deregulated here in Southeast Pennsylvania, so we can do that. I don't know where you are and if that's possible, but if it is, sign up for renewable. There's nothing to it. It's a 5-10 minute phone call. Another thing is get it right internally. Make sure that you model these sustainable operations and practices in everything you do, especially the CEO and the top brass of the organization. I've done some research recently, and it turns out that when a CEO is behaving badly, especially in the world of sustainability, it really damages the reputation, the financial reputation, and the sustainability related reputation of the organization. So folks, pay attention. With social media, you can't hide anything these days. And if the CEO is behaving badly, people are going to find out and they're going to share that. Discuss benchmarks and other organizations that are sustainably run. Who is the iconic business out there that is really doing the right thing, and how can we benchmark against what they do? There's nothing wrong with sharing some ideas, where the idea is not to be a completely sustainable organization, but to have a whole network of sustainably run organizations. Create insights. People sometimes need skills in figuring out how to pull insights from data. I find this in the classroom quite a bit, unfortunately, and I think this also transcends into the business environment as well. We have lots of data, we have lots of charts, we have lots of things we can pull in terms of information. We can look at conclusions, but what's the next step? How about those insights? How can we use that now to make a managerially relevant recommendation? How can we do that? What can we do with it now? Analysis paralysis is a huge problem. Lots of businesses collect data and sometimes they don't even have time to sort through it and talk about the implications, but we have to stop and we have to look at that and see how we can develop managerially relevant insights based on that data and that combined information. We also need to give folks tools. If we're going to ask them to do these things, we want to make sure that they're able to do it. And let's give them some tools to do that. So one thing is we can create clear sustainability related objectives for our courses, programs, all of that sort of stuff in the business school. People learn by doing, and we need to embed SDGs in everything we do. Here are a couple of tools that I'd like to share with you. For example, I'm going to take a bit of a turn and talk about this more from my perspective as an educator. Okay, so this is more relevant to the classroom right now, but this can also be used in a business environment as well. So for example, you have a final project for your students, and it's all about maybe recommending what to do for this big business. How are we going to attack this new target market or something like that? One of the things that you can do is you can say to your students, hey, you know what? If you're thinking about opening up a new retail space, or you're thinking about going into a new area, expanding your market, trying to tap into a new market, you better check, see what's going to happen according to Climate Central. You can go on here and you can click and you can see where there might be high areas of risk for things like sea level rise. So you can look at these kinds of things. This is a great tool from Climate Central. Another tool is available from the B Corp. Benefit Corporation. And this is actually from yesterday. So this is kind of cool. What this is an outside organization. They now have 907 companies that have achieved B Corp certification. And what is that? It's a 5-dimension certification. They come into your organization. They have a look. They look at a whole bunch of different indicators for each one of these dimensions. And if you pass the test, you get the stamp of approval, and you get to share the fact that you can use this logo on all of your advertising, website, corporate offices, and so forth. The thing about an independent outside certification that I think is particularly useful in terms of communicating value to your stakeholders is that it's more believable because it's coming from an outside organization. It's an independent organization. It's a whole lot more credible than just telling the story yourself. I mean, let's face it, people are very cynical these days. A lot of bad actors out there have been lying to consumers about their sustainability efforts. So this evens the playing field quite a bit. Another thing that you can do is you can calculate your carbon footprint. Go on here and have a look and see how much carbon your lifestyle, your consumption choices are responsible for, and then compare that against the global average. I think in the United States, you'd be very surprised about how high we are compared to the rest of the world. Shout out to my own university, St. Joe's here. This is a dashboard that St. Joseph's University has implemented. It's called the Sdg Dashboard. And what you can do is you can go up here and you can pull down from the little pull down menu thing, and you can look at a whole bunch of different educational institutions. And you can see along the top, they have all of the 17 SDGs. And then along the side here, we have all of the things that we do in business schools. What do? We teach, we do research, we collaborate and do partnerships, we engage in dialogue, as far as, expert testimony and partnerships and things like that. And then our own organizational practices as well. And this has been deployed already. This is, I think this is out of Switzerland. I'm not entirely sure. But you can see which SDG they're doing really well on. And this particular one, this looks like infrastructure. They're doing really, really well in SDG number 9, but maybe they need a little bit more help with some of these other ones. For example, maybe poverty or no hunger or something like that, SDG 1 and SDG 2. It's a good way to map out where you are and where you might want to be in terms of greater coverage of different kinds or different dimensions of the SDGs and different SDG goals. I think another really important thing is this is the last time that we do absolutely not want to make people feel comfortable and fuzzy about this issue of climate change. We need to make people uncomfortable. And sometimes if it takes shaking them up just a little bit, if that's what we need to do to motivate action, then that's what we should do. I think it's very important to make folks feel uncomfortable. So challenge them. Get them out of their comfort zone. This is absolutely not the time to spare anyone's feelings. And I like this little ad here from Charlize Theron. Make it tangible. Another thing, tell people on a very real basis what this is going to mean. Here's an interesting statistic. Did you know that the typical consumer eats a credit card a week in microplastics? I mean, that's a shocking statistic, right? And if you were one of these folks who really likes to have your water bottle, those disposable plastic water bottles, you're eating about a credit card and a half a week in amount of microplastics. That makes it tangible. That makes it real. It's an ooh kind of reaction that people get. Here's another one. How about this? With the population of the planet about to approach 9 billion people in about the next decade or so. How are we going to feed people? How are we going to be able to provide protein for those? If that's the case, we know for sure that it's very resource intensive and very, very bad for the environment and climate to rely on beef or animal proteins. Therefore, protein can be taken from other places like cricket. So hopefully everybody is going to be able to like the taste of crickets, because they're going to have to get used to it one way or the other. Talk about that as a way to make it tangible to the students. Make it self-relevant. Another thing is, here's another tool. This is from NOAA. And what you can do is you can type in an address, and then you have this little slider bar right here where you can move it up and down, and you can see, what does 4 feet of sea level rise look like? What does 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet? What does this look like in my city, in my hometown? So something like that is very, very self-relevant and very shocking. Ask people, do you like to ski? Well, better get it in soon, because pretty soon we're not going to have a whole lot of snow in the wintertime. Do you like the idea of maybe going to see Australia? Well, you better go quick, because if you go in the summertime in Australia, it's summertime down there, it's going to be too hot to see the center of Australia. One of the things that does really seem to matter quite a bit to students, and I see this every day, when I'm in the classroom, is they are very into pop culture, fashion, all of these kinds of things. But guess what? You can kind of talk about some fashionable brands, for example, fashionable and sustainable brands, for example, Free People or Patagonia or Allbirds out of New Zealand. These are doing fantastic things. They have, cutting edge, styles that students are really into these days. And guess what? They're doing the right thing at the same time. And then make it fun. All of this doom and gloom is so hard, right? Here's a victory that I think was really interesting. So TerraCycle is a company out of Camden, New Jersey. And what they do, their motto is to eliminate the idea of waste. And what they do is they encourage people to send them used up products and packages and all of these other kinds of things. And they will give you in return, 1 or 2 cents per items. And then TerraCycle uses that to make new products. And what they did is, a couple of years ago, they had a contest with a whole bunch of elementary schools. And they said, guess what? Everybody, what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to collect as many toothpaste tubes, used up toothpaste tubes, toothbrushes, and dental floss containers. And the school that sends us the most, what we'll do is we will make a brand new playground for you at your school. And this is a copy of a picture that is for the new school that won. And this is completely made out of 100% constructed from old toothpaste tubes, toothbrushes, and dental floss containers. So that's fun, talk about some of the fun things. And you know what? Call out those folks. It's fun to do a little bit of Sherlock Holmes sleuthing and find out some of these big offenders out there and call them out when they're doing the wrong thing. That part of it is really fun as well. So to wrap it up, we have a multifaceted problem. It's absolutely going to require an integrated and networked set of solutions. I think today's young professionals need to be prepared to take a leadership role. And in order for this to be, and I believe that this is an issue of business competitiveness. As a country, we need to facilitate this, because our businesses need to compete head to head in a global environment. And if our students are not prepared in a way that students from other countries are, we are going to be a bit of a step behind the rest of the world. Good thing is we have this hot off the presses news from Penn State. And in fact, it is so hot off the presses. I just heard it this morning, but the Penn State is about to launch a new major in sustainable business. So here is the link for that. So kudos to my alma mater once again on another fantastic thing that they're doing. So to wrap it up today, I'd like to leave you with this. We started our conversation today talking about journeys. So for those of you, no matter where you are in the world, some of you whom I've never even met before, I think about this as a way in which we are really inextricably linked. My fate is tied to yours and vice versa. And so I encourage you to continue this journey, to continue this movement, to continue this motivation, and to do something, to continue to act, to motivate our students, and to do something about it. Okay. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diane. That was just such a wonderful presentation filled with so much enthusiasm and information. And thank you so much for being with us, and congratulations again on your award. So we are going to move to some questions, if that's okay with you. So we had several come through the chat that I'll read, and to you. You did address, a few things, but we'll make sure that we get the questions to you here to make sure that we fully answered them, and if you have anything else to add. So the first one was, if our ppm is higher than the record millions of years ago, why are our sea levels not as high as that same time period back then?
Oh, because there's a delayed effect. Absolutely. So if we stopped burning today, and we emitted not one more bit of CO2 into the atmosphere, we are still going to see changes for the next 20, 30 years because there's that delayed effect. Yes, it's not going to be something like that. So maybe that's part of the reason why people don't see the urgency of the situation, is because it hasn't happened yet. We have put so much into the atmosphere right now. We're not going to see the effects of what we have right now for probably about 20 or 30 more years. Yeah. And that's the other problem with CO2, is because it stays up there probably for a couple of 100 years. It doesn't dissipate. It doesn't break down. It doesn't go away. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then the same person asked, are there measurable ways that we can see both our individual and collective effects on climate change?
I would suggest you go to the carbon footprint calculator and check it out yourself. You can see for yourself what the result of your own consumption choices are. And, we can share that, maybe that link somehow. But there are several out there. And this is the one that I selected to show you in the presentation a couple of minutes ago. I think that one's out of the UK. Okay. But there are several tools out there, and you can see for yourself. To the biggest thing is to cut back on CO2. So if you can get a more fuel efficient car, good, somebody, thank you. If you can get a more fuel efficient car, if you can switch your house and your organization to more fuel efficient or sustainable or renewable sources of energy, that would make the biggest impact. You can in the very short term.
Terrific. Thank you. So we actually had, this person actually submitted this ahead of time, which is really nice. So I have a child who is a junior in high school interested in sustainability and environmental impact. She is not sure how to mix this in with a business degree, and each school, including Penn State, seems to handle this topic differently. So maybe you could talk a little bit from your perspective, and, Eric, if you want to chime in too, from a Penn State perspective, but Diane?
So yeah, if Eric wants to start to finish, I'll start. Okay.
Sure.
So I do think that you need to look at some of the other indicators of what the university is doing. I would not say at all that it makes sense for a parent or a student to sort of construct a curriculum on their own. That's hard work. This is kind of part of my job, and it takes years sometimes you can't just construct a curriculum, but you can align yourself with an organization, with a university that's doing the right thing. So how do you tell if a university is doing the right thing? Well, I think there are lots of indicators that you can look for to see. One is, what are they doing in terms of not just talking about sustainability, but maybe incorporating sustainability into who they are, what they do, everything, as far as their operations can go. For example, do they have solar panels in some of their buildings? Do they have a green roof? Do they have LEED buildings, which is a outside certification for a building that was either built or maybe retrofitted to have sustainable components and materials, and then its systems run as well in a sustainable fashion. So like water, HVAC, air conditioning, heating, all that kind of stuff, lighting. So those are the kinds of things. And that stuff ought to be transparent. That ought to be on the university's website. Do they have do they talk about the SDGs at all? Mm-hmm. Do they have majors that talk about sustainability. I think that would be something that you would look at. And I'm super excited to find out this information about what Penn State is doing. And I know that it's completely hot off the presses. Actually, I had heard about that they were doing stuff. I didn't know when it was going to be deployed.
Yeah.
But one of my colleagues at St. Joe's actually told me, Penn State's about to launch something really amazing. Really?
Yeah. That major sustainability website is terrific. Eric, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that briefly.
Sure. I'll just be real brief so we can get other questions in, and I'll put this in the chat. So what I say in the chat here is that we're going to give you guys a sneak peek, even though it's not officially launched yet. So I'll put this in the chat, but it is a perfect segue, that question, to the answer. So this is, I'll just simply say that you can go to the link here and check it out. Don't share it widely just yet. We're still working on and going through some parts of it. But essentially, this is the result of I think a nearly 5-year effort to answer a very seemingly simple question, which is based on all that Dr. Phillips presented, the challenges that we face, what should business schools be teaching? Now, in addition to the fundamentals, right? In addition to the fundamentals in like the 4 Ps of marketing, for example, or how to read a financial statement in finance, clearly we need to understand these fundamentals, but use them in fundamentally different ways. And the way that sustainability expresses itself in each major is very unique. And so I just encourage people to check out the site. You can essentially see how every major has a role in advancing sustainability. That's why we called it major sustainability. So check it out. And if you have other questions, you can let us know.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Okay. So Dr. Phillips, can you share an example of a person's work or interaction in the climate change arena that's inspired you to keep going?
I would say, when I think about, the benchmark, of who's doing it right, I would have to say that I'd look at Patagonia as an organization and the things that they've done. They started out before it was cool to be sustainable. You know what I mean? It was part of their inception and who they were and how they sort of just crafted their business. The very first bit of what they were all about was sustainability from the very first. They've done a fantastic job, but let's talk about, there's plenty of organizations out there that also started out in a completely different way, but also are doing some really exciting things as well. Here's another one. I like Coca-Cola. You can love them or hate them, but they really have made an effort to do a lot in terms of sustainability. On the one hand, we definitely need to hold them to task for all of the plastic that they're adding to the environment, and it's absolutely not a good thing. However, at the same time, they've had this multi-year partnership with the World Wildlife Fund to clean up the 7 largest river systems in the world. The Yangtze and the Nile and the Danube and all of this. And what they've done is they've made tremendous efforts. They've pulled out in, the invasive plants. They've gone in there. They've funded a lot of cleanup efforts to ensure that, folks in those areas have clean water. Now, why would they do something like that? Well, on one hand, Coca-Cola gains a lot of credibility with connecting with an organization like World Wildlife Federation because they have years and years of doing the right thing. When the UN, for example, has a question about sustainable business and different issues on water or the natural environment, World Wildlife Federation has a seat at the table. So they are very, very well respected. So Coca-Cola gains by connecting with them. And then World Wildlife Federation gains by connecting to the marketing and the might and the resources that and the branding resources that Coca-Cola has. They wouldn't have access to those kinds of resources. Coca-Cola has those resources. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship between the two. You can get me started talking about all kinds of stuff. It'll be hard to get me to stop.
That's okay. No, thank you. That's a terrific answer. Okay, so we have 2 more questions, so I think we can probably fit them in. Okay, so this is kind of a long one. Sustainability and social impact at the corporate level tend to be intertwined by department and often by role. Those departments have heavily focused on the social impact portion of their role over the past 2 years. This person is speaking from experience. So both areas are important and require more resources than are being allocated. Do you expect to see sustainability separate from social impact at the corporate level, and how?
I think they're the same. When we talked about these folks who are going to be displaced, if you think about India, there are parts of India where it is going to be uninhabitable if the temperature gets any higher in the summer. There are parts of Australia and other parts around Asia that are going to be absolutely, and in Africa, that are going to be completely uninhabitable. This is a social justice issue just as much as it's a sustainability issue. But one of the things I'd like to say is sort of spurred a question in my mind that, organizations really are ideally suited to address these kinds of issues. If you look at governments and you look at NGOs, they're limited because they're limited by the amount of resources they bring in. So a government is limited by the amount of tax dollars that they bring in, and an NGO is limited by the amount of donations that they bring in. And once they use up that money, that's it. They don't have any more money to spend on whatever initiative that they're going for. Businesses, however, don't have those same kind of limitations. And that's really exciting, isn't it? Because you know what? As long as they make profit off of every single unit that they sell or every single service that they provide, they can keep going. They can keep going and going. They can make 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. They can scale their operations and they can keep doing the right thing. So if it's an organization that's focused on sustainability, whether it's environmental sustainability or social sustainability, it can happen as long as the company's making profit. They can scale and they can just keep going and going. And that's one of the really exciting things. They're the same.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so the final question that we had through the chat was, how do we go with EVs when we don't have sufficient infrastructure for charging? This person says that they live in a multifamily high rise.
Very hard. Wow. I wish I had an answer to that. I know that this infrastructure plan that was just passed through Congress is for a huge proportion, not a huge proportion, a big chunk of money out of that is going to charging stations. You're exactly right. I mean, it is really, what do you do? Chicken or the egg? You have to, you want to encourage people to buy and use EV cars. However, what can you do as far as charging them? It's a really, really hard situation. If you can come up with an answer, I would love to do that. I mean, the only thing that I know that I've been advocating my university to put in a couple of charging stations, and it's very frustrating, the budget cutbacks and this and that, and we don't have time, we don't have money, whatever, everybody has those concerns. But I think to help your employees who would like to charge up, and to help in terms of a visual, just demonstrating to the world that this is important to us, to our students, to our stakeholders, alumni, whoever, I think you got to do it.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Diane. I guess, the playground example was a terrific one, but I'll end with maybe asking you just to close out, what's giving you hope right now? I got to say young people, to get into the classroom, I believe it's a privilege. What I do is a real privilege to motivate and inspire, generations of students, and their enthusiasm, their hard work, and their passion is really what gets me up in the morning. So yeah, those people, they do it. Terrific.
For me.
That's excellent. Well, I just want to thank you and congratulate you one final time. And, congratulations. And thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us today. Congratulations. Thank you for being here to all of our attendees. And I did also want to thank one final time, Eric, and also Jerry Susman and his wife, Liz, for their support. So in just a moment, for any students who are on from the Smeal Ethical Leadership Challenge, I'm going to put up a QR code. But just a final thank you to everyone who attended and who participated. And thank you so much again, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.